Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Hall of Fame Show, and I'm Kirk Buchner, and along with my partner, Evan Nolan, we run NotInHallOfFame.com, the fictitious Athlete Hall of Fame, the fictitious Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the United States Athletics Hall of Fame. And you and I got some work to do in the next little month. February is going to be busy for us, but we've got some special guests and two people who played a little bit of a part in that. I sort of like had Cooperstown, Dave Metter and Julian Schultz, who did a little panel. I had them debate each other, and not really debate each other. I threw two names at them of people who we nominated for the Baseball Hall of Fame. By the way, guys, you're voluntold to do that again. So when we do that next year, because a lot of the guys that you talked about got in. Baseball was the highest represented out of all the sports that we did, by far.
As it should be.
Well,
yeah, you got baseball people on, so we're like, yeah, of course, move on.
So before we sort of like go into a bit of the main event, which is obviously the Baseball Hall of Fame results, Dave and Julian, where can everyone find you on social media?
You can find me on Twitter or whatever you call it, at Cooperstown Dave.
And you can find me on Twitter at _birds-on-the-bat.
I didn't realize you're in Michigan. So how are you a Cardinals fan when you're in Michigan? How does that work?
I'm not even from Michigan. I'm from South Florida. I'm from Miami.
That raises more questions.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? My dad is from St. Louis, and he basically raised me from birth to be a Cardinals fan. He made sure that I would never root for another team, and he succeeded.
When your bird's on the bat, just look at the logo. Obviously, it worked.
Clearly.
There you go. So our main event really today and our opening is the Baseball Hall of Fame, which has just 3 days ago, or 2 days, no, 2 days ago, we recorded this on Thursday night. So on Tuesday night, they made their announcement, and I had Dave and Julian join Evan and myself just to get a bit more of an expert sort of take on this. So let's look at who they've come up with. I think the first one was pretty obvious to all of us. I think Adrian Beltre, who got 95.1%. I don't know if there's anyone who thought that he wouldn't get in. Certainly not in this group. What are our initial thoughts on Adrian getting in as a first ballot Hall of Famer?
I would say that I'm happy, and I think given just the history of the Hall, I try not to be too presumptuous on how it's going to work. I would have been more surprised if he didn't get in, but there's still a little bit of a surprise along the way of, okay, everybody's cool with a really great defensive third baseman with 3,000 hits and 470 some home runs, and that's enough, and we don't have to really debate it. So that all seemed great to me, and I think there's the disharmony amongst some that he didn't get like 100% or closer to it, which to me is kind of a pointless academic point when 95.1% is very high. It's higher than Willie Mays. It's tied with Ruth and Honus Wagner for the 18th highest. It's great and fine, and congrats to him.
The two of you being more baseball historians than myself, I was trying to think of a player who, and Evan and I talk about this a lot in football, where we've seen that with a lot of offensive linemen. But I'm trying to think of a ball player who really made their bones in their second half of the career. Because when I look at Beltre, if you would have told me when he was 30, okay, he's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, I would have said, like, you're nuts. But it's got to be somebody.
It was his one season at the Red Sox, honestly, turned his whole career out. It was like a turning point for his career. When he came into the Red Sox as a Red Sox fan, I was like, oh, cool. Adrian Beltre, he'll be pretty good. And then he was spectacular. And then the whole rest of his career was significantly better than it was before that.
Yeah, Julian, do you have somebody you think of? Because offhand, I'm blanking.
I'm blanking offhand as well. Typically, I mean, it's the normal just kind of course of athletes that once they hit 30, maybe they have a couple more prime years, quote unquote, but then they start to decline. It's much more common to see something like a Pujols decline, a Griffey decline, and hell, even an Ichiro decline. So for that reason, yeah, Beltre really does kind of stand out as somebody who actually got not only maintained his success, but actually got better in his 30s.
Mhm.
I suppose you could argue Randy Johnson, perhaps.
Yeah, I
But
think pitchers is where you're more likely to see it. Like Hoyt Wilhelm debuted at age
yeah,
29. Robin Roberts was really great in his like mid 20s with the Phillies, and then he kind of fell off completely. And it wasn't until he got to Baltimore in his mid 30s when he kind of had a resurgence that without that, I don't think he would have ever made it to the Hall of Fame. So with pitchers, there's a certain dynamic based on what they do where you see that. I'm not so sure with a position player though.
Yeah, no, that was just something that sort of like stood out to me. Uh, Not that I have a problem with this, I certainly don't, but I just thought that was a very unique thing that doesn't happen in this sport often, especially for a position player. But obviously, we're all happy about that. Uh, Somebody who I'm personally very happy about, finishing second and getting in, ballot number 5. We have full-time Colorado Rocky, and I guess the second person who's going to wear the CR, Todd Helton.
yeah. So I mean, Todd Helton, he's he's a Hall of Famer now that is someone who's generated quite a bit of debate, especially in the baseball community. And the main reason behind that is because he played at Coors his entire career. Coors having a reputation for inflating offensive statistics, and Helton being a first baseman, although he played very good defensive first, the heart of his resume is his offensive stats. So thereby the question being, how do we interpret his offensive stats in light of the fact that he did play in this environment that may have quote unquote inflated them? Well, it did take him quite a few years to get in, and that's frankly the reason, because if you look at the face level, his numbers are excellent. 316 hitter, roughly a 950 OPS, 2,500 hits, over 300 homers, almost 600 doubles, which I know Dave is a really big fan of doubles, as he often talks about on Twitter. So at base level, if Helton had put up that stat line in any other park in baseball, I'm quite confident he would have coasted into the Hall of Fame, and it wouldn't have been much of a question. But the fact that he didn't Coors raised the debate as to whether or not that was a product more so of his environment or not. And ultimately, and I'm glad about this because I've long been a Helton supporter, it seems the voters agreed that yes, he was excellent and that he just happened to play in Coors. It did not create his excellence in a sense.
There's also the fact that he played kind of when he did overlapping with the PED era where numbers and expectations related to numbers end up a bit skewed. So for a first baseman with 369 home runs, even despite the Coors dynamic, is really not as high a number as many would probably like to see out of a first baseman. But then again, he is 20th in doubles, nearly 600 doubles is incredible. And uh, yeah, I echo everything Julian said in terms of how deserving it is, and it's great that he's finally in.
I do have to think, so,
Go
hold
ahead.
on. I also think though, part of the reason it took Helton a while to get there is just how crowded the ballot was the year he came on. So he came on 6 years ago. He got like 16% of the vote, but that was the last ballot for McGriff, to give you an idea when that was. So we had McGriff, we had Clemens, Bonds, all those folks still on there, and there was a point where we could only vote for 10. So even if people wanted to get there, it took a while to clear out the people that top the steroids folks before you even really got a really good look at them. So I think that probably had something to do with it too.
And
Uh,
another thing that I'd like to highlight, sorry, Kirk, do you want
no,
to say
no, no,
something?
please go ahead.
I was going to say another thing that I'd like to highlight, Todd Helton, is just how absurdly good his peak was.
Mhm.
For one, in the year 2000, Todd Helton hit 372 with 59 doubles, 42 homers, and 147 RBIs. The next year, he hit 336 with 49 homers, 146 RBIs, and 54 doubles. Todd Helton, over the course of those 2 years, from 2000 to 2001, became the only player in Major League Baseball history to have back-to-back 100 extra base hit seasons. It's only happened 15 times in the entire history of baseball that a player has had 100 extra base hits in a season. And Todd Helton did it twice in a row. He also had 400 total bases each of those seasons. And I think it's only been 28 times that that's happened in Major League Baseball history. And nobody's done it back to back since the 30s. So again, to contextualize, even though, yes, he played at Coors, he was absolutely dominant for a few years. And even if you look at, WAR, right, which is a stat that does contextualize for the environment in which a player plays, it does take into account that Coors Field does benefit you, right, hitting wise. Todd Helton was putting up 8.9, 7.8, 8.3. I mean, he was still one of the top players in the game, even with a heavy Coors correction being put in at that time frame. So this idea that Todd Helton, again, was just a product of Coors really just doesn't hold up. And at his peak was still clearly one of the best players in baseball.
What I was going to ask, and I'm not sure if any of you know this, I'm just going from some of the reading that I've done. And I apologize, I can't recall. I should have prepped this. I was more prepping for some of the other stuff that we were going to be talking about later. My understanding is that in Colorado, they sort of like try to do something with the baseball with humidors and try to alter that, but I don't know what year that was to try to counter that. David, looks like you might know.
I mean, you're correct in what you're saying, but I don't know when that started.
Okay.
But unfortunately, that's sometimes a level of specificity that a voter might not even care to look into, and that
Honestly, Dan.
Again, it's not like another angle on the whole Kirk Coors thing and the Rockies and all that is, if it was that easy, why is it like just him? Like, where are all these other career amazing hitters? Like Larry Walker was great in his own way and then proved it in St. Louis as well. But it's like, at that point, you're calling it like the Helton effect, and it extends to like what, his bat? I don't know. So, yeah, it's just, I'm glad people came around. The ballot has been clogged in ways that maybe he was a person people wanted to put on their ballot and it took them a while. But thankfully it's a conversation that's over now.
Okay. Also too, I just want to close with that. I think anyone, I don't care where you're playing, if you retire with a 3-4-5 slash line, that's all I need. Someone who, for me personally, I would have lost a bet if you would have said that he's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Not that I have a problem with it, but we've got Joe Mauer, who is a first ballot Hall of Famer, 76.1. Great hitting catcher, MVP, batting title, multi-time Silver Slugger, multi-time Gold Glove winner. Certainly aided by the fact that he spent his entire career with one team. I wonder if Joe Mauer is not, let's just say, as I think we've all talked about this. If he had sort of like the Kenny Lofton series of teams, I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm happy that he's in, but he doesn't scream to me first ballot. Am I wrong?
I was a little surprised. For one thing, using Bill James' Hall of Fame monitor, his score was 92, and being at 100 means, I think, likely Hall of Famer. I forget the exact wording.
Yeah, that's correct. Likely it's 100.
Right, and nobody has gotten in first ballot lower than 106. So by that measure, the idea, and that's the point of that stat, is predictive. So it aligns with what your assumption was, Kirk, where he doesn't really seem first ballot. I think winning those batting titles as a catcher did it. I would very easily vote for him. Sometimes whether someone should be first ballot or not, that's just not that important to me. It's great that he's in. He also, he got in with 76.1. He just barely got in. It's the second lowest first ballot performance. Pudge Rodriguez got 76 even. So he just got in. I think the single team thing, the hometown kid thing, seemed generally well liked, and that peak was just amazing. And I think it's very positive to see that despite the elements of his resume that might lead us to have been surprised a bit that he got in first ballot, that he got in, and what that could mean moving forward for other candidates.
I mean, he was on my vote because I don't know if the two of you are on that also with the Internet Baseball Writers Hall of Fame, or not Hall of Fame, but the Internet Baseball Writers. So I'm part of that group, and I voted for him there. I don't. He was always going to get my vote. It's just I don't know. This might be just a personal thing where I look at other people and think, is Joe Mauer one of the weaker first ballot Hall of Famers? Yet he's a Hall of Famer in my eyes too. Am I just like,
well, look, he's only the third. He's only the third catcher to get in first ballot, so that's another thing that.
Who are the other two?
Don't say it, Dave. Don't say it. Let's see if Kirk can guess.
Oh, God damn it!
What one you gave us?
Yeah, one I gave you. The other, come on. I think you can get it. I believe it.
So one's Ivan
Barabench.
So
you got one of them.
Oh, it's not Berra. Okay.
Barra took 2 ballots.
Barra was like it was a multiple like.
Oh, you already talked. Okay, you already talked about Pudge. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So
yeah.
So that just again aligns with the idea of why you would be informed with the idea of this catcher might not be first ballot because you have to be Johnny Bench or Rodriguez, who barely got in.
Well, but I think we can all.
Whereas with the third baseman in the Beltray sense, I think there's been 7 first ballot third baseman out of, I forget the stat exactly, but 7 of the 10 Hall of Fame third basemen to debut since 1947 were elected on their first ballot. So that's, a kind of a shocking thing. Like, it's hard to get in as a third baseman, but if you do, you're probably getting in immediately.
Right. Let's see. I'm doing that game. One in my head as to who they are. So who are there? Robinson, Boggs.
It might be easier to think of who were the 3 who weren't.
Well, Robinson, Boggs, Schmidt. So who were the 3 who weren't? Was Edgar Rodriguez count as a third baseman?
No.
Well, one was quite recent.
Roland.
One was a bit sad. As to their journey to the Hall, like how long it took and the timing.
Cubs.
Oh, Ron Santo.
Santo.
Yeah, he said they were going to elect him as soon as he died, and that's what happened.
And then the other one is maybe tough because you probably might think he would be, but Eddie Matthews.
Oh, okay. I would have thought Eddie Matthews right away. That would have taken a while.
Okay. So I guess let's move on to those who didn't make it. Someone I thought would, not that I would vote for him. I've been very vocal, and I said that before we went on, and Evan's heard this many, many, many times. I'm not big on Billy. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I saw that, Evan, buddy. Like you and I, for two people who have never met, my God, we know each other so well. We're the two old puppets. Statler and Waldorf. I don't know which one I am.
Well, since you can't say Waldorf, I guess that makes him me.
Yeah,
so.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So Billy Wagner, 73.8% on ballot number 8. He's going to get in, obviously. My knock on him, and I look forward to 2 different views to tell me why maybe I'm right or maybe I'm wrong on this one. I look at his, and I think it's something we don't do enough in baseball. His playoff performance was crap. Utter crap. And to me, he's not my favorite reliever on this ballot. It's K-Rod, obviously. That's for me. Am I right or am I wrong?
I'll jump in on this one first. So Billy Wagner is a pretty contentious kind of inflection point in a lot of reliever and Hall of Fame discussions right now. And it's in part because of what you just highlighted, Kirk. For one, his postseason resume it's bad, right? 10.03 career postseason ERA. I mean, he was terrible in the playoffs. There's no other way to put it. It essentially only relies on the regular season. And now, to his benefit, baseball is a sport where we primarily evaluate players through the regular season because of how hard it is for a team to get to the postseason and how you have great players like a Griffey, who had virtually no postseason play in his career, although it's clear he was an excellent player. Ernie Banks never even making the postseason, but again, no one questions his role as a Hall of Famer, so oftentimes we just kind of overlook the postseason as a part of a resume. The pro of Wagner is really his rate stats in the regular season. So it really, his resume really boils down to three numbers, in my opinion: 2.31 ERA, 422 saves, and a .998 WHIP.
Yeah, that's good.
So from a rate stats perspective, his ERA and his WHIP are incredible. They're all-time great. His ERA plus of 187 is second to Mariano for relievers. It is, again, off the charts dominant. His 422 saves is very nice. I think that makes him one of, 9 closers to have 400 saves. So that kind of gives a little credence in the idea of it's not just rate stats, he also has some volume to him. But then there's a lot of other issues that people bring up. He never led the league in saves. He only won one Rolaids reliever award. Really? He only won one time a reliever of the year award? And a big one that I know, I don't want to jump the gun too much and highlight what Dave is probably going to talk about, but he only pitched 903 innings. That's not a lot, right? So it's a classic kind of case of he was clearly very dominant when he did play, but he didn't play a lot. And when he played in the really tough moments, speaking of the postseason, he also wasn't particularly good. And this has really made a mess of things, frankly, as far as Hall of Fame discourse goes. Personally, I am for Billy Wagner for the Hall of Fame, but I'm not a rah-rah Billy Wagner guy. And I completely understand any perspective that's not for him for the Hall of Fame. Dave, you want to jump in now?
Oh, you're muted.
Still can't hear him.
No.
Well, Dave's figuring that out as a whatever perspective here. Part of I think the problem I have with Wagner too is, or at least the perception of him, is the fame part. I don't know if at I was around for all of Billy Wagner's career. He pitched for the Red Sox. I mean, so I got to see him up close. At no point did I think, wow, I'm watching one of the greatest pitchers of all time. Right? I mean, you give me the choice between him and Jonathan Papelbon, who got 1.3% a couple years ago. I would have thought Papelbon was the guy who I'd much rather have the ball in a situation than Wagner, right? So I know that the numbers are great for him, but any team he's been on, I can think of almost a better reliever from that team who hasn't gotten close to the Hall of Fame. And I know numbers are on his side, but this just seems like one of those ones that, absent the advanced stats, I don't necessarily see it, is what it comes down to. And I'm much more pro Wagner than Kirk is. But
yeah, and I know that it comes off that much. And I'm trying to put myself in more of a perspective, maybe because I'm just so pro Rivera. And I look at what Mariano did in the regular season with those 6 stats, and he lowered them in the playoffs, except for that one thing against your Red Sox that one year, which I know you loved, but
I have no recollection of which you speak.
Okay, but and I'm willing to be considered wrong on this. For me, I got 2 relievers that I think of. One who was clogged and never had a shot because of that ballot, and they weren't going to sort of do the steroids guys. John Franco, who comes to mind. Another one, and even then, if I had a ballot, would he have made my 10? I don't know, because that ballot was so crazy. Dan Quisenberry was the most dominating reliever in the mid 80s, in my sort of baseball emergence, watching the sport. Dave, are you back on?
I don't know. Am I?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, so to step to your very first point, I think he's inevitable,
Mhm.
but I do think it's interesting to point that Jim Bunning in 1988 got 74.2%, which meant he was 4 votes shy. He then had 3 more years left on the BBWAA ballot, failed to get elected, and then had to go to committee to get in. Wagner was 5 votes short. It doesn't mean he'll need 5 next year. The total number of voters will change inevitably. Um, there's a lot of stats that I've put out on Twitter around this issue. I like Billy Wagner, but yeah, I just have fundamental issues with relievers in the Hall, as well as the rate of the interest in them for the Hall relative to other pitchers, be they on the polar end, starting pitchers who are throwing 3.5 times more innings than someone like Billy Wagner. So, and given their work, of course, their ERA is not going to be as good as Wagner's, but that doesn't make them somehow less worthy. But then also the people over the years who were relievers or hybrids with starters who just threw in more difficult spots. Billy Wagner threw in mostly, he entered the ninth with a lead, and that's a very different situation. More than any other third of the order, he faced 7, 8, 9. He wasn't in the DH league. To Julian's point on the reliever award, that's a league specific award. So it's not like Rivera was taking them all because Wagner was in the NL. So there's just a lot of things that I could point to that I'd vote for Rivera for sure. I'm not so sure about Hoffman. All the others, and I think there's almost a revisionist thing that goes on around his fame. To Evan's point, that I just do not believe this idea that people thought Billy Wagner was a Hall of Famer when he was playing. Maybe that's unfair of me to say, but ultimately the circumstances of his entering games when he came into situations that weren't just, let me enter a clean ninth inning with a lead, which is a really nice situation. There was a lot of struggle. If he had to get 4 outs or more, just a lot of things. There was I forget a regular season game where the Phillies were trying to get into the playoffs before they had their nice little run where they ended up winning a World Series, where he blew a big save right toward the end of the season that kind of set them back. And it seems like there's a pattern of that. And yeah, he's just short for me. I mean, I'll be happy for him when he gets in. And I wish he had gotten in, at least in the sense of get him out of this ballot system and let's get through it. But yeah, it's just not, I don't like it. And I guess I'll just button it with, I am a big fan of innings. I think innings matter. I think people too easily refer to them almost as like a denominator within a rate stat, something that is an opportunity, like a plate appearance for a batter or an at bat for a batter, when really an inning pitch is an action. A third of an inning pitched is something you do towards winning. It's not just an opportunity to get a hit like a plate appearance. You need 27 outs to win. So the idea that these starting pitchers, they only throw 5 innings, that's not valuable. Well, that's 15 outs. Why is that? Why are those 15 outs so less valuable than these 3 outs that happen to be at the end of the game? So that's my general feeling.
Okay. So finishing with on the 10th year, I'll admit I also vote for him, saying that I never thought he'd get this high. Gary Sheffield, 63.9%. He now goes to the veterans ballot. Evan called it perfectly when someone who has similar stats, slightly less, I think. Fred McGriff, he says, like, this is the best thing that was going to happen to him because he's going to get in right away. And some writers said the same thing. They're wrong. Sheffield got a PD taint, even though he's never been caught. We saw on the veterans ballot what they did with Clemens, Bonds, and I'm blanking on the other one, but they didn't even. Thank you. So they didn't even get enough to even get to tell us what they got. Sheffield's going to be in that limbo land. This was his best shot. It's done. Am I wrong?
I would say that you said a lot of things that I would have shared about not being overly optimistic about his chances on the committee. I would say that a lot of these PED cases, as they're referred, they're not one-to-one. That Bonds and Clemens have certain issues off the field that Sheffield doesn't. Palmeiro had the famous moment in front of Congress, and also just I don't think he inspired the level of appreciation from fans during his career that someone like Gary Sheffield did as well. And then also the electorate that votes for this is just 16 people, and it changes quite a bit year to year. So when you have like a pool that's that small, it could vary rather wildly. All that said, no, so on a certain level, I could see them appreciating him given the nature of his PED issue relative to others. But yeah, no, I wouldn't like bet on him getting in immediately.
So this is one of those things where like I think that a lot of people who wax and wane about the PED users, like Bonds and Clemens, oh my gosh, they're off the BBWA ballot. It's never going to happen. I think they're frankly wrong. I do think that there will come a day at some point in the next few decades when the seal gets broken in a sense, and they start letting these guys in. It's clear that as time has gone along, people have become more amenable to the idea that these guys belong in Cooperstown, as evidenced by the BBWA vote percentages increasing through time. And it's just inevitable that at some point a committee will start putting them in, and then the lion's share of them will probably get in.
I would say one thing I was looking for ahead of the vote. Of course, Sheffield wasn't the caliber of player of Bonds or Clemens, who are absolute all-timers, but he didn't get as high of a return as either of them by like 2 to 3%. That shouldn't be surprising. My thought was if he could outperform Bonds and Clemens, that could indicate the evolving attitudes of this BBWA electorate. And then the other thing is, to Julian's point, yeah, I think eventually this is all going to get sorted out. And one way it might be is when the active players of today are eventually members of that voting body in the era committee, because Bonds and Clemens were their childhood heroes, not their peers that maybe weren't nice to them at all-star games. And they might look at them like, oh, they took my, I gave up a home run to him, but he was cheating. And so I think that it's going to be hard when it's like, I mean, Barry Bonds was amazing. So that's my view. It's like, and I have a feeling like that sort of exciting, like feel of, oh my God, that dude's a Hall of Famer is probably what some active players feel too.
Yeah. So my whole thing on with the Hall of Fame and steroids. First of all, I think you're right. I also think if the younger writers come in, they have a better understanding. The writers who kind of turned a blind eye to steroids while they're going on, who are still part of the voting block, are still the people keeping them out. I mean, I was alive at the time when Andrew was found in McGuire's locker. He was asked about it, and the guy who asked the question was excoriated by his peers. I remember that, right? It happened 19. And those guys are still voting and keeping everyone out. Now, at the same time, Bud Selig, who's seeing all this, got in. Joe Torre is in. Tony La Russa is in. Bobby Cox is in. Like, how many wins does Tony La Russa have if, like, the NCAA, you knocked out every game where somebody cheated, played in, right? Get rid of McGuire, Canseco, and I mean, how many wins does he have left, right? So it's odd to me that we're still in this moralizing. Oh, it's baseball writers. Nobody's more moralizing than baseball writers. But it's strange we're in this baseball, this moralizing thing. And what makes him different than McGriff, again, when I said that, Kirk, is McGriff had no whiff of steroids on him. He had 493 homers. If the 94 strike doesn't happen, he gets those 7 homers, he's in the first ballot because he would have had 500. But as soon as he was off, and they got a chance to vote him in, they did, because lack of steroids and everything else. But we'll see with McGriff. I mean, again, it's comical to me that McGriff ended up behind Wagner, because I don't think there's anyone in baseball history who would have taken Wagner over McGriff. I'm sorry, over. No one in baseball history would have taken Wagner over Sheffield.
And I think with Sheffield and McGriff, and I've said this often with McGriff, what didn't help him is that, okay, he went in as a Brave, but he was with so many other teams, McGriff to Sheffield too. And so I wonder, like, if Maurer had that vagabond career, is Maurer a first ballot Hall of Famer? And I don't think he is. But
We'll see.
yeah.
And there's one other bit I want to highlight here regarding PEDs and the BBWA ballot, which is relevant because it's actively acting out on the ballot this year, is that there's clearly a very stark differential treatment between PED users. And that's specifically that Gary Sheffield got approximately twice the percentage of Alex Rodriguez and Manny Ramirez, who are both sub 35%.
Right, but
and
there's a big thing coming up when we get there that they did that. But
exactly,
sorry. Yeah,
and that's the key to it, right? The key differential treatment there. There's two bits to it. First, the ambiguity, and there is some kind of plausible deniability as to whether or not Sheffield did actually use, while there's a lot less for Ramirez and Rodriguez, but also fundamentally that Ramirez and Rodriguez took while it was expressly outlawed and got suspended for it.
Yeah.
And they each got suspended twice.
Yeah.
So there seems to be now some kind of almost differential treatment between guys who took maybe in the 90s and guys who got suspended after that rule was put into place, in a sense. Yes, Dave.
And to that point, and this is what I thought you were actually going to say, but I appreciate your point, is like, yes, they got suspended, and that seems to be a clear line for people, but perhaps it's at least meaningful in the sense of seeing progress that Sheffield got whatever he got, 60-some%. Mark McGuire topped out below 24%. So he's a guy who never got suspended. And that 23.7% was in 2010. It's quite a long time ago now. But I think maybe you can compare them more because that suspension thing really seems to hit people. To me, I get it, but it's more like you're going to double penalize. Like, weren't they suspended? Isn't that the penalty? Like, if these people aren't supposed to be eligible, they should be on the ineligible list.
Okay.
But anyway, we're not trying to have this whole conversation.
Oh, no, but let's.
David, we're not here to talk. We're not here to talk about the past, David. McGuire.
Yeah, but to that point, I think Evan and I, me, myself, I think possibly more than Evan. My line, and it's a soft line, but in 2004, this is when the player said, okay, we're going to agree to this. Now, once you do, so I don't give a shit, personally, what Bonds did before that. I don't care what Clemens did before that. I don't care what any of them did before that. Afterwards, I hold them with an asterisk. I still voted in the internet baseball writers thing for A-Rod. Saying that, I always have to think about it. Same with Manny Ramirez. Let's just go to those two now. So like we're looking at two people who actually went down. Their votes went down by just only 1%, but it's not trending upwards. With A-Rod, I find that very interesting considering that he's part of Fox Baseball. So part of sort of like welcome back to the baseball family. And it doesn't mean a damn thing for his Hall of Fame case.
And again, as a Red Sox, I was just saying, and as a Red Sox fan, he's sitting on that set next to David Ortiz, who also admitted or got shown to show Mitchell report, but was then later proven that he did take something and got in on the first. It's just interesting. The two of them are sitting right next to each other. And one got in first ballot, one looks like he's not going to ever get in. Sorry, Kirk.
Yeah, no, but to your thing though, Evan, right? Ortiz never got popped after the player said, "We agree, we're not going to do this." Now, baseball is a fascinating sport. I mean, Gaylord Perry's autobiography, "Me and the Spitter," they didn't have a problem inducting a guy who his whole thing was, am I cheating? Am I not? Am I cheating? Am I not? But if you agree to this, there's a mental line for me. Because of A-Rod's overall numbers and Man Ram's overall numbers, I can kind of excuse it. Or maybe I can't. I don't know. I flip-flop on this over and over and over again. And I can see why he isn't getting that jump, because I wonder if some voters are thinking the same way I am. I don't know.
And
Yeah,
to be
I
fair,
think.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to make a joke. I said, to be fair, Manny didn't actually use. He was just trying to manage his pregnancy. So,
Right. Yeah, I think that both of them, for one thing, A-Rod, I recently reread one of those reports from years ago on exactly what he was up to, and when he got caught, how he kind of just threw lots of people under the bus. He named other players. He remember he like sued the like Major League Baseball. Just a lot of like, as far as I know, Manny kind of took his lumps. But either way, these players I think are just kind of stuck in purgatory, taking up votes on this ballot until their term off after their 10th year. And it's just the way it is. And from the ballot perspective, it feels frustrating, but at the same time, there's always going to be players who kind of linger for 10 years and don't get in, whether it's for this reason or something else. So it's just part of the process.
and that you thing you just said too about I don't know when he comes up, my favorite acronym, APOHI, the anthropomorphic pile of human excrement, Ryan Braun. When Ryan Braun comes up after trying to destroy that guy's career, knowing he did something entirely wrong, I even with everything else, I don't know if he's ever gonna get anywhere.
I just saw he just got put on the Brewers Walk of Fame or something that they call it. So, and I read all the replies on the Twitter announcement, and Brewers fans seem to love him. So,
Yeah, but
gonna hit the ballot in
for
2026.
his thing, it's actually right in front of a urinal.
Yeah. I mean,
Thank you.
there are few athletes in history, and I didn't hate him as a player, but just in terms of what he did when he knew he was using and tried to destroy some random dude's life. Just, I'm sorry. He's beyond redemption for me whenever he comes up. And he's not on the ballot. Let's go back to the ballot. I apologize.
Okay, so we sort of skipped a bit in terms of descending votes. Someone who I'm massive on, and I'm so happy that he's getting closer, especially considering that on his first ballot he was less than 10%. Andrew Jones, he's 61.6, ballot number 7. When I had the pleasure of interviewing Sean Foreman, Sean is the head of Baseball Reference. This is his guy. Sean's got a vote. Sean was also part of the veterans vote. So I feel that this is going in the right place. Obviously, I've got my own personal thing for that. I love the complete play of this man. But he only moved up 3.5%.
I wouldn't say only as a negative. I think this is kind of how things go. I think that I mean, this stuff isn't fun to talk about, but the reality is I think his domestic violence charge is a significant element of his case in a way that in days of the in the distant past would maybe not be as cared about by voters. And that as Adam Dorowski said when I was on a podcast with him the other day, he made an interesting point that I haven't validated, but I think a lot of the Andrew camp, or the types of voters who would be most inclined to vote for him, are the more analytic types who are more progressive minded in lots of different ways. And that those same minded types of people are the types who are going to say, I'm not comfortable voting for him given the domestic violence issue. And personally, I'm a bit torn about it because I'm not that quick to ever want to invoke the character clause. But frankly, that issue troubles me a whole lot more than PEDs. And if I had a ballot, I'd be really troubled with how to handle Andrew Jones, even though on paper, I think in a way he kind of has the inverse career of Adrian Beltre, where he had the incredible first half, kind of fell apart in the second half. But I don't really care about the falling off in the second half.
A question for you, because and I'll apologize. I should have known this, but I didn't. Sadly, domestic violence is going to be the theme of this whole show, or sexual abuse, really. I was not aware that Andrew Jones had something associated with him. Well, what does he have?
I mean, I'm not comfortable talking about it at length because I don't know it in detail enough that I don't want to misspeak on something of that sensitive nature.
Okay, so something suspected, but not like when we get to Omar Vizquel, correct?
I don't want to say yes or no.
Okay, no, sorry, yeah, because I wasn't aware of that. So, because
but I will share that it's something that writers even explicitly mentioned at times in their write-ups as when explaining their ballot. There were also writers I saw who said they voted for Andrew, but they really didn't feel great about it, which signals to me that they could flip to no rather easily. So I think given that current situation, and then we know now how the ballot, who the system works for who gets the vote, as the types of voters who would probably might overlook that are also the types that are probably losing their ballot. The younger, more progressive-minded voters who would maybe find this,
okay, but
to ruin his case are the ones who are going to enter the system.
I guess this is where I find it fascinating, right? Because we're going to be talking about somebody who was probably tracked in year 5 and is dead in the water with Omar Vizquel. Like Omar Vizquel, or maybe should we just go to him? I guess.
Sure.
All right. So Omar Vizquel was he finished 17.7. Was it 3 years ago? He was over 52.6%. He dropped to 49.1 the year after, because right around the time of the vote, that's when his wife or ex-wife, I don't recall which, I don't recall, basically said that, I'll leave it at that. Because Evan and I were going to go deep. We're going to do a deep dive on some other stuff later, and I just can't do this the entire show.
Yeah, not to get into too much detail, R.E. Vizquel and the claims made against him, but based on when the claims were announced and based on how his balloting percentages have changed since then, I think it's pretty clear those have directly impacted his Hall of Fame chances, and that while he was frankly trending quite strongly towards the Hall of Fame, I think Dave has mentioned this many times on Twitter, that no player has ever received 50% and then not ultimately gotten into the Hall of Fame until Schilling, Bonds, and Clemens, who just fell off the ballot. So basically anyone in the past who had ever received 50% ended up getting in, or via committee. So it's almost like a demarcation line of, if you get it at some point, you've convinced enough people that at some point you're going to end up getting in.
But
well, Omar might be the first not to at this point because of what's come out.
Yeah, because there's one massive difference. Not any of those people who hit the 50 ever went later down and dropped like this.
Right. I call it the Maris line, because it's 43.1%. Roger Maris is the one who has the highest percentage, who hasn't gotten in one way or another, except Bonds, Clemens, Schilling, and Kent, and now Sheffield. So anybody, everyone else has gotten in. So Vizquel, he had gotten over 50%, I believe, at one point in his time on the ballot.
Yeah,
so
2020.
Right. So I think he's gonna break that rule. But I think there were just also a lot of voters who probably weren't that strong for him in the first place, and that kind of ended it as well. He's probably, again, like A-Rod and Manny, going to linger, get a bunch of votes every year, and he's got 3 more shots.
Actually, fascinatingly enough, his career in a lot of ways is extraordinarily kind of like the polar opposite of Andrew Jones, in terms of it's extremely reliant on longevity. It's extremely reliant on the fact he played 24 years, 2,877 hits, 11 gold gloves. It's not extraordinarily analytically based. He only had 40 some odd WAR, an 80 something OPS plus. He doesn't really look that great for the analytics crowd, and he really depends a lot on this whole longevity argument. Whereas Jones, 1,900 hits. No post-war Hall of Famer has ever been elected by the Hall of Fame. I mean, by the BBWAA with sub 2,000 hits, right? 254 batting average. It's but he has the highest, I believe, WAR for defensive WAR for any outfielder ever. And he has this kind of reputation as having been very dominant in his best, both defensively and by the fact that he was smacking home runs, albeit at a low batting average. So it's kind of interesting. They're kind of like very different cases. One analytics, kind of a short career. The other one, non-analytics, super long career.
Okay. There's one name that we sort of skipped over, and I think we all know why he's not in yet. Basically, he's getting a slap on the wrist. Carlos Beltran, 57.1. He's on ballot number 2. I think he would have been a first ballot Hall of Famer had he not been implicated, and accurately so from what I've read, in the Houston Astros scandal or sign stealing scandal. He's going to get in. They will eventually induct him. I'm sure there are a few people who said no, we're not going to induct him on ballot number 1. When does he get in?
I don't know. I don't think he would have been a first ballot regardless of that. I think that there's a lot of people who, for one thing, they're like, oh, he didn't feel like a Hall of Famer. That thing that I don't really care for as a huge input to someone's decision. But also people, in my opinion, tend to really struggle to understand how am I to evaluate a center fielder in the post-Mays Mantle period, because after them, it's Puckett and Griffey, and if you want to say Andre Dawson. I mean, there's literally been no one else elected. To expect people to be Mays and Mantle is really unreasonable. So, it's not like Beltran has 500 home runs or 3,000 hits. He, in my view, is a stone cold Hall of Famer. I don't understand people's hesitation, but it exists. It's out there. I see it in people's ballot explainers. When will he get in? Maybe 3 years. I don't know. But it's one that I struggle to really understand the no's that aren't related to the scandal.
So yeah, let me talk about this for a second, bridge off of Dave on this point. I think one of the things that kind of hurts Beltran is that, and you'll hear guys like Rob Parker talk about this, they want somebody to have some overtly special number in their resume. And Beltran doesn't have 500 home runs. He doesn't have 3,000 hits. He didn't hit 320 or something. He was, in a lot of ways, kind of like a generalist, right? He hit for power, 430 homers. He hit for a decent enough average, about 280 for his career. He played very good defense. He stole about 300 bases. He was a switch hitter. So he kind of did a lot of everything. And in the totality of it, yes, he lines up very well with Hall of Famers. I mean, if you want any question about it, put up his stats against Andre Dawson. They're almost a mirror of each other. They're almost a 1-to-1 copy. It is unbelievable how similar they are. But yeah, people look at it off the cuff and they might be, I want some big number or something like that. But the reality is that there's quite a bit of precedent for a player of his quality to get in. The totality of his resume really does project election. And if you look at some of the more kind of discrete stats like total bases, 4,700, no one with over 4,500 isn't in without PEDs. 1,000 extra base hits. Almost every single member, I think there's 39 players all time with 1,000 extra base hits. Every player but Luis Gonzalez is in, again, without PEDs, and Pete Rose. So basically, when you really break it down, he's pretty clearly a Hall of Famer.
And then there isn't anything remotely like what Kirk could have said about Billy Wagner. Carlos Beltran in 65 playoff games, 256 plate appearances, hit 307. His OPS is over 1,000. one of the absolute greatest playoff hitters of all time. He but for whatever reason, it's just not really, it doesn't resonate with people. Certain players, their greatness doesn't. Sort of like to me when it was like Scott Rowland's obviously a Hall of Famer, right? And a lot of people are like, no way. And it's like, okay, maybe he doesn't have a transcendent moment or a big shiny round number that you like, but my gosh, like not everyone's Willie Mays.
Uh,
Oh, go
to
ahead.
answer, I've seen, and we'll get to it when we get there. I've seen some people say they think that there may be as many as 5 people for the first time ever next year's ballot. That 5th person, pretty much everyone's talked about is Beltran. I don't agree that they're going to be 5 next year, but I think that Dave's 3 years out is probably pretty accurate. He'll probably get in the 60s next year, probably just miss 2 years from now, and then walk in on his, what's that, 6th time in the ballot. 5th time in the ballot.
Yeah, 1936 is the only year where 5 people got in.
Excuse me. That was the first year.
Right. And so, and 4 has only happened a handful of times. So that's one thing I hope people keep in mind. We're all very excited about this year's class, but don't expect 3 every year. This is very hard.
Very rare.
No, it took him 3 times to elect DiMaggio, so.
Oh, God, that's
ridiculous.
So staying here in Philadelphia, sorry, Evan. Chase Utley, 28.8, first ballot. So obviously this is for you here, Dave.
Yeah, I got it.
This is a lot bigger than some of the other players that we've just seen get in. Todd Helton, as we mentioned earlier, less than 20%. This is a very, very good start for him. I don't think anyone thought he was going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, but this is your path.
Absolutely. I think people who follow the Hall of Fame tracker were very disappointed if you are for Utley by his ultimate result of 28.8. That's one thing I don't really love about the tracker. It can throw off perceptions. The idea that anyone would be disappointed by this result, that's an unfortunate situation because 28.8 is a great start. Yeah, he didn't hit the Maris line of like obvious eventual induction. However, only 3 players who debuted on the ballot before 2013 are not in the Hall of Fame who debuted with 28.8% or better. And that's Steve Garvey, Louis Tiant, and Maury Wills. So to debut at 28.8 is a very, very good sign you're going to get in. When it comes to his case, again, he's sort of like Roland and Beltran, where to me it's like, I don't know what everyone else was watching. I know I'm a Phillies fan. I think I can generally be pretty honest and objective on this because there's certain players who I'm not as high on, but Chase Utley was the greatest overall all-around player, one of the best that I've seen, who was great at everything. He didn't win a Gold Glove, which then makes people who maybe didn't see him play all the time doubt his defensive greatness, but the advanced analytics suggest it happened. My eyes, for whatever, not everything. You try to get validation from all these different things. Yes, the Gold Gloves aren't there. That's not necessarily meaningless, but I'm not the biggest fan of that as a major indicator of much. And studies or people have shown that a reason why his analytics are so high defensively is because he was kind of ahead of the curve with positioning, and he positioned himself supposedly on his own, not via coaching, into places per batter that helped him get to more balls than other players. So some people debate if that's something to credit for or not, or you should devalue those defensive metrics because he did it that way. To me, I don't know. That seems kind of brilliant. He's one of the most.
They want to devalue him being so. Ed Reed must have really sucked at football because he baited people into throwing the ball towards him. That doesn't make any sense.
Right. So, and by certain metrics, he didn't have Rickey Henderson's stolen base total, but he was one of the most efficient, best base runners I've absolutely ever seen. He has the best stolen base rate for anyone with at least however many stolen bases, 100 or so.
50.
Yeah, and he also, I forget how the stat works, but he's like one of the absolute best ever at taking an extra base. But that's something if you can find clips on YouTube that show he just had that baseball intelligence, and for his bat for a second baseman was great. His challenges, durability and staying on the field. And I appreciate and understand those shortcomings. So I understand if people don't vote for him. But ultimately, I'm a Chase Utley guy, obviously, here. And I think the 28.8 is a really positive indicator for him. But I do think it's going to be a long haul if he ever gets in through this electorate. Now Julian's going to take a different tact.
Yeah, when you brought up Chase Utley, I saw Dave smile and I kind of smiled too, because we know that we are kind of like on opposite sides of this. I'm not pro Utley for the Hall of Fame. So from the baseline, I'll say that. Now, that being said, the 28.8% is quite promising for his future chances. And if he ever gets in, I'll celebrate him all the same. I'm not going to sit here and be one of those people on Twitter who whines about Harold Baines making the Hall of Fame every day for the rest of their miserable lives. But that being said, personally, I don't think I would be able to bring myself to cast a vote for Utley. And a lot of that is that personally, when I look at his resume, I see a lot of the advanced stats that I need to lean on to kind of convince myself of his Hall of Fame candidacy. And personally, I am not so inclined to throw so much weight behind them. I kind of like a balance of advanced stats, awards, traditional stats, and all of that. And it's a little too on one side of the spectrum for me personally. That being said, obviously an excellent player. You're damn right. I would have loved to have him on my team. So yeah, that doesn't. I'm not trying to diminish that he wasn't some good player and that it's nonsense. He was a very good player. Personally, though, the guy that I prefer over Utley is his middle infield mate, Rollins. I love me some Rollins. And I know I've talked about this on Twitter with Dave quite a bit, with other people. There seems to be a lot of like odd anti-Rollins rhetoric these days, which is very weird and feels misplaced because maybe you don't think he was quite as good as Utley, but I mean, he was an excellent player in his own right as well. I'm kind of going off on a tangent.
No, I'm glad you did because he's next in the voting thing, and I was going to go there. I don't have him higher than Utley, so I want to hear more about this.
Well, it comes from a couple of they're quite close, to be fair, but it comes from a couple of main kind of factors. So Rollins, he does have worse rate stats. His OPS is, for instance, about 100 points lower than Utley. It's like 820 to 720. It's quite a bit lower. On the flip side, he has 2,400 hits to Utley's 1,800. I mean, that's 600 difference. That's a big swath, right? Rollins does have about the same number of homers, about 240. He has 500 doubles. That's big. He has 100 triples. He has 470 stolen bases. He won 4 Gold Gloves. He won an MVP. He kind of checks a lot of boxes of having been a very rounded player who, he could hit some, he stole a bunch of bases, he played good defense, he has a big award in his career, he was on the championship team, same as Utley. So I just kind of like the kind of breadth of Rollins's work that everywhere I look on his resume, was he good at this? Actually, yeah, he's kind of good at that. Was he good at this? Actually, yes, he kind of did have some pop in his bat and so on.
Yeah, I think one thing, in a way, he's a lot more traditional stat based, whereas Utley is deep in the metrics, and then each of them have a lot of shortcomings on the other half. I think that as a Phillies fan, one thing I see talked about online, maybe it's from non-Phillies fans, so maybe they don't know, but this idea that Utley was kind of the leader of those teams, I don't know. It seemed to me always to be Rollins he was the older player. He's the one who ahead of their run was like, we're the team to beat. And that led to their run where they made the playoffs for the first time in a million years. Utley was kind of a leader through stoicism and by example in a way that there's something to that in a leader. But, Rollins would never shut up. He was that guy who had a lot of fun. And he was excellent. I mean, again, for his whole era, it's like if you're the third best shortstop behind A-Rod and Jeter, like I don't think that that's something to be ashamed of. And I don't think you need to be at A-Rod and Jeter's level to be a Hall of Famer. He's the Phillies' all-time leader in hits. There's only 2 teams of the original 16 teams whose franchise leader is not in the Hall. One is the Phils and Rollins. The other is the Athletics with Campaneris, who's maybe a similar player. But Jimmy was, again, like Julian said, he had pop for his position. Another thing is, even though his defensive metrics aren't as glowing as Utley's, I heard Jason Stark make this point, and he's a Philly-based writer, and I agree with this point. We both watched a lot of Phillies games. If you had one defensive play that needed to be made by those Phillies teams, you'd rather it be Rollins fielding the ball than Utley. Rollins was a sure hand. He was a great defender. He was the leader. I don't know what his chances are. He got 14.8. It's his 3rd time around. We've seen weirder things happen. But he was also a Clemente Award winner, just like a real good all-around dude. And I don't love when people knock him, but I'm also aware of the shortcomings of his case. But I also hope people don't overly rely on, well, the defensive metrics aren't good enough, so no.
Who do you have? So you have Rollins personally over Utley as a Phillies guy?
I don't know. I think, I don't know. I haven't really thought of them in that way. I've been more consistently ready to vote for Utley. Of late, I'm more inclined towards Rollins because Rollins is a type of Hall of Famer I just don't find myself usually as drawn to, but I'm starting to get more into that type of Hall of Famer.
Let me say, I think Rollins is a very classic like committee selection, kind of following like the idea of like a Jack Morris. Like maybe his rate stats aren't so incredible, but he's got really nice volume. He was really, he was like this quote unquote winner in a sense.
Phil Rizzuto.
Yeah, like he's the kind of guy that I would be very, comfortable getting in via the committee at some point. I wouldn't be surprised at all if that does indeed happen.
Well, it's funny. I know I'm skipping again from a Philly guy, but we do have Jack Morris on this ballot, in my opinion, in Mark Burley. I think Mark Burley, when he's not going to get elected this whole time, and he's going to get through, and by the time he's in that committee, we're going to have a whole bunch of his numbers are going to stand out against like all the pitching numbers now. He's going to have 2,400 innings versus, I mean, people talking Jacob deGrom, and how many innings does Jacob deGrom have in his career?
1356.1.
Why did you have that ready?
Did you have that in front of you, or do you have that memorized?
I have a lot of stuff memorized. I just don't show off.
He has a tattoo on the inside of his hand right here. He's just looking down at. But like, I honestly think the new Jack Morris is on this ballot right now with Burley, who I don't think is ever going to get in on the 10 ballots. But when he gets to the committee, he's going to look so different than everybody else they're looking at that he's going to get in that way.
All right,
and Burley's, I was just going to say, and Burley's 3,300 innings are more than DeGrom's whatever number. What was that, Julia?
1356.1.
But do you know what 1356.1 is more than?
900.
903. So, it's, in my view, that's one of my things with like Wagner and these relievers. It's like, okay, I'm not really into that, but if you're into that, you got to be into someone like Mark Burley. He had, I think, 8 seasons with a 120, an over 120 ERA plus. Mm-hmm. I understand why he doesn't excite people, but I like Burley's case. I think he was great.
Here's a question then for all three of you. I have him below Andy Pettitte.
I think that's fair.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, I'm not a pro Burley guy. Really liked Mark Burley in his career. I'm not pro him for the Hall of Fame. I think he's a little short. I am pro Andy Pettitte. And there's a few differences. So Burley has 214 wins. I think Pettitte has 254. So it's like the 200 versus 250. Burley has, I think, 1,870 strikeouts. Pettitte has 2,448 or so. Anyway, again, it's about 600 difference in strikeouts. So Pettitte wins out on the cumulative statistics in that sense.
And the playoffs.
That's a big thing. So then beyond that, we could look at rate stats too. They each have about a 3.8 ERA, so neither one of them really wins out there. Mm-hmm. And yeah, the thing is about Pettitte is that he wasn't particularly dominant in the playoffs, if you look at his numbers, but he does have the most career postseason wins of any pitcher ever.
Again,
That's got to count for something.
Yeah, I guess when you see go ahead, Evan. Sorry.
I was gonna say, I'm sorry. That win stat to me is Julian Edelman with the catches in the postseason stat. He was just there all the time, right? Like there's 40 more wins for Pettit because he played for the freaking Yankees. Like his whip
win them.
Okay, but I mean, when you have the lineup of the Yankees, and I mean that's a whole significantly different thing. Wins are something which has fallen very, very differently, but like when you're comparing those two guys, their careers are remarkably similar, with the exception. Hold on, Kirk. I mean, like Burley's whip is decently lower, right? His ERA is slightly lower. He didn't have as many strikeouts, that's true. But like 40 wins over the course of their careers, playing for the Yankees versus playing for the White Sox has got to be worth at least like 3 to 4 wins a year.
Right. And I think about that. I think Julian might say, or some people will say, but that's what happened. Like Mark Burley was on the White Sox. Pettit was on the Yankees. The Yankees made the playoffs. He got to start a lot of games, like and how it goes. But one thing that Adam Dorowski's brought up recently, which it kind of shocks me when I look at the head-to-head thing that you can do on Baseball References. Go look at Andy Pettit compared to CC Sabathia, who everyone is assuming and feels should be a first ballot Hall of Famer. And this, again, Pettit has the PED thing, but whether Pettit and Burley, and then you look at them compared to CC, and it's this difference in the amount of enthusiasm seems greater than the difference in the players.
Mm-hmm.
CC benefits a lot from having the mega milestone. Right, he has 3K strikeouts. It's just like a big deal. And also, in a more general sense, CC just kind of, he doesn't have like any big hole in his resume. And I kind of talked about this on Twitter recently that, I mean, okay, 250 wins, 3,000 strikeouts. He has a championship. He has a Cy Young. Like it's like check, check, check. You know, like he has all of the major things that you'd really kind of want. So it's kind of hard to poke at him and say like, he's missing something.
Yeah. I mean, again, though, you compare Burley to Sabathia, right? I mean, Sabathia 3.74 ERA versus 3.81. He wins there. Strikeouts, he dominates 3,093 versus 1,870. But Burley has 300 or 270 fewer walks in his career. He gave up fewer homers in his career. Like, do I think Sabathia's a better pitcher than Burley? Absolutely, I think Sabathia's a better pitcher than Burley. But I agree with you. It's a little weird that everyone's like, so Sabathia's walking in next year. And I don't think there is. I agree with you. I don't think it's a big difference between Pettit, and I don't think it's that big a difference between Pettit and Burley. So I don't think it's that huge a difference between Burley either. So again, I don't think Burley or Pettit are going to get in through this process. I think they're both committee candidates at some point in the future. But it is very, very strange, like you say, that Sabathia is walking in apparently next year, and these other guys are probably not going to make it in 10 years. So
one person we haven't talked about yet, he fell off 0.6%. I love his on-base percentage, but is he a Hall of Famer? Bobby Abreu, 14.8%, ballot number 5. Not trending in that direction. Probably won't get to 20.
I'm a Bobby Abreu voter, but one of my biggest surprises about the results, one would have been Andrew Jones not maybe getting a bigger bump, though again 3.5% isn't so bad. But the idea that Abreu went down, that was very surprising. I feel like that signals some real pessimism for his case. Not that there was a lot of reason to assume he would ever get in through this process, but the idea of going down was very shocking. He's a guy, as Julian alluded to, I think doubles tend to be ignored. People know what home run numbers are good and what overall hits numbers are good. And anything in between, like a single's as good as a double. A double is just something that informs someone's hits total, and then it's in their rate stat. But Abreu was a great base runner, not a lot defensively, but really one of the best hitters, and one of these guys who I understand if he didn't feel like a Hall of Famer when you were watching, but that doesn't mean he wasn't a Hall of Fame caliber player, we see generation after generation, the people of that time overlook someone, and we think, what were they thinking, those people back then? There's no reason for us to think we're any better than that, and that and also the same applies to, why did they elect that guy? We don't like him. We're bound to do that too. So I think Abreu's just somebody who we didn't appreciate because when he was playing, walks weren't as valued, doubles weren't valued, and unless you had Ricky level stolen bases, and it applies to Beltran too, people don't really care that much about stolen bases. So his performance was surprising to me, and that he went down, but I'd vote for him, and I don't feel like his chances are that good moving forward.
Yeah, do you want to jump in, Evan, or you want me to go?
I was gonna say I'll just concur with you. I'd also be an Abreu voter. I do remember back when he won the home run derby that one year, thinking to myself, Bobby Abreu just won the home run derby. Isn't that kind of weird? And I was like, no, he's actually just much better than I thought he was. And
he was a heck of a hitter. He had a beautiful swing.
Yeah.
He was just a great hitter. He just didn't do it with that type of pop that people want most.
Yeah.
Well, it was his patience that I loved.
I'm sorry?
His patience. When you look at Abreu, I got to find a place where they can do that stat. The amount of sort of like pitches per at bat. He's got to be in like that higher echelon, just sort of like working the pitcher, doing all these little things. And he's so hurt by just when you look at just the basic stat of, oh, he's only twice an All-Star. I love Abreu. I don't see him ever getting in, not because I don't want him in, just because I don't see them trending that way. I would love, as a Jays fan, and I think, you as a Phillies fan, Cardinals fan, Red Sox fan, if we had Bobby Abreu for 10 years, how happy are all of us?
Yeah, one thing that Jason Stark pointed out as to, I think he didn't vote for him. He was like, it's interesting how, and I forget who the GM of the Phillies was at the time, but they consciously traded him because they wanted, supposedly, this is why, they wanted the clubhouse to now become like Jimmy's and Chase's, which to Jason suggests like something must have been kind of wrong there if they wanted to turn the page on this great player, and that's something maybe that doesn't tend to happen, or if it does, it's for players that we already think of as kind of personality problematic. But yeah, it's a shame he wasn't on those Phillies teams. If he was, maybe that's the difference, and he gets in. But then again, Jason Worth was very helpful here.
Yeah, I mean, Bobby Abreu kind of suffers from a kind of deal where he wasn't thought of as very dominant in his time, like the classic, which both Dave and Evan have mentioned today. Did he feel like a Hall of Famer? Not really, right? He never finished top 10 in MVP voting. He was a two-time All-Star. Like, neither one of those are it's like, that's not that dominant, right? When you look at that. If you look at just the total body of his work, I mean, the guy was just excellent, right? So let me read you a stat line here. From 1999 to 2009, this is an 11-year run. 1999 to 2009, Bobby Abreu hit 300 with a 406 on base, 902 OPS. He averaged per year 99 RBIs, 104 walks, 29 steals, 40 doubles, 107 runs. He was basically, and only about 21 homers, but screw it. The dude hit 300, 400 with a 900 OPS, with 100 RBIs and 100 walks, and 30 steals for 11 years. I mean, it's hard for me to argue that guy is not a dominant player, especially when, I mean, he walked 100 or more times 8 straight years, 99 to 06. He drove in 107 straight years, 03 to 09. He was just the mark of consistency. And when you look at the totality of his numbers, again, 570 doubles, 400 steals, 2,400 hits, 4,000 total bases, a 290, 390, 470 slash. He checks the box for me in the end. The stats are just, they're just good enough where I say, yeah, that guy was a Hall of Fame level player.
Okay, we have 3 other players here who have advanced. I want to do them individually, though. I don't want to lump them all together. Francisco Rodriguez, Evan can tell you that I think that he is the top reliever here, mainly because I'm a playoff guy and an impact guy. Does he need Wagner to get in to have any shot? Because that's how I feel.
My feeling is, and I don't have the tweets to prove it, but my recollection of the dialogue around Trevor Hoffman was, okay, he's not Rivera, but all right, we're gonna elect Hoffman, but that's it. It's not like Billy Wagner's gonna get in as a result, and then that happened. So the idea that people might think, oh, yeah, let's put in Billy Wagner, but K-Rod won't get in, right? I think that is not necessarily how it's going to play out. He did go down though.
Yeah.
K-Rod's performance was a bit surprising to me. I wonder how many people have him as, oh, if I had 11 votes, it would have been him. But I also think there's a lot of reasons that if you're a Billy Wagner voter, that you'd probably be a K-Rod voter. For me, he's a no for the reasons I've already shared. But I think that his going down by 3% was one of my bigger surprises.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if when somebody doesn't do particularly well on the ballot, if a lot of the other voters kind of look at the final percentage and come to kind of almost like a group think percentage, be like, it's never going to happen. What's the point, right? Just like I'm moving on from this guy. It's not worth wasting a vote on him with, I think somebody might be better. I think K-Rod might suffer to that. Yeah, personally, I like K-Rod a lot, right? 437 saves, which is 4th all time. He had 2 Rolaids, a championship, 6 All-Star appearances, I think a 2.87 ERA, and obviously, I mean, 3 times leading the league in saves, and the big one, he holds the single season record for saves, if you care about that stat, with 62 in a season. So there is quite a bit to like about K-Rod's resume. I understand not voting for him though. His rate stats aren't, especially if you put his rate stats next to Wagner's, they just don't look that impressive. And that might also be a reason why he's suffering, just because there's a guy on this exact same ballot who just looks more dominant if you look at them side by side. But again, I like K-Rod, but I get why people don't vote for him.
And unfortunately, just because I've brought it up, it's been brought up with other players, it feels unfair not to, but he had a variety of violence issues in his history, including an actual charge of domestic violence.
I missed that one too. Holy crap.
Yeah, so again, no one enjoys looking into this or thinking about these things, but
you got that right.
That's something that could impact votes as well.
Okay. So let's just lump these last 2 players here. No, actually, I don't want to. Torrey Hunter. He survives. 7.3%, ballot number 4. Again, part of that whole group of, I would say, like, hey, if I had him as a Blue Jay for 10 years, how happy am I? What does that mean for the Hall of Fame, though? And am I looking at a Hall of Very Good player when I look at a guy like Torrey Hunter?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that, look, Torrey Hunter was really good. It doesn't bother me at all that when people vote for him, it doesn't bother me that he stays on the ballot. But you look at his rate stats. I mean, 277 hitter, 793 OPS. Yeah, he has nice numbers, 350 homers, nearly 500 doubles. He was too short, 2,400 hits, 9 Gold Gloves, which is great. But you just kind of look at the body of it, and it just kind of says it's a little short, And especially when you have him on the same ballot with guys like Beltran and Abreu, other outfielders from the same time frame, and you just put them side by side, and it's just clear that he's not as good as the other 2. It's hard to kind of really make much of a case for him to get much movement on this ballot.
Also, too, I think it hurts too because he's so likable.
Yeah.
Which also ties in with David Wright, if I could.
Hold on a second before we move on. I was just going to say, Torrey Hunter though did feel at times like the face of baseball or a face of baseball many times. Like when he robbed the home run in the All-Star game on Barry Bonds runs out and picks him up and everything. Like he just felt like one of the best players in the game for a while, which we have people ahead of him who the numbers say were better, but never felt that way. So again, I'm not saying he is or isn't based on that. I'm just saying we're talking about that fame part of the Hall of Fame. Hunter has it more than significantly more than a bunch of people above him.
And something I think that makes Hunter's career look lesser is like if you look at individual seasons, and I'm just really thinking about WAR, one of the challenges he has is the seasons where he had his best defensive seasons were not seasons where he hit well. So his in the reverse of that is a lot of his best hitting seasons, he didn't get a lot of defensive success. And that's a challenge. Yes, he has a certain charisma that people liked personally. Something that really bothers me about him is he's been extremely aggressive politically, anti-LGBTQ, to the point of being like a very active voice. I understand people have private views, but to be so aggressively active in that area,
I didn't know
kind of
that.
irks. Yeah, I'm sorry to keep bringing these things up, but it's just these are things.
That's okay.
But yeah, I think that even if someone's for him, I feel like it'd be hard to get him in your 10-person ballot, if nothing else. But I agree with Julian where it's like, as a player, I can see it, but it doesn't. It's not a really. There's not a lot there or enough there for me.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
All right, so our last guy is David Wright. He just managed to survive 6.2%. Our mutual friend, Vinny Lospinoso, did a show that's going to go up soon where he's pushing why David Wright should be on. And I really love that show selfishly because Vinny always keeps everything so neutral. So hearing Vinny sort of like go like, I'm a Mets guy, it's kind of interesting actually. So David Wright, I think if I was a Mets person back in that day, I would be huge on him, lunch pail guy. Yet taking myself out of that, he's lucky to have survived to me.
Julian's going to handle this.
Oh, you're putting it on me.
Or
Okay,
Julian's
I've
going
tweeted
to
quite a
lead.
bit about this. I've tweeted quite a bit about this. It's one of the same way that relievers are like Dave's talking point on Twitter. David Wright is one of mine. David Wright is an anomalous survival on the ballot. Meaning that if you really just take the breadth of his career, whether it be totals, accolades, WAR, melted all together, his resume, frankly, just does not project that he would ever reach 5%. And him doing so is if anything, it's kind of a nod and a testament to how people feel about him. But that, frankly, if you look at his resume, it's just not a Hall of Fame resume.
I agree.
I mean, you run down the line, one thing after the other, 1,700 hits. We're talking about how the BBWAA has never put in somebody who's sub 2,000, right? Who debuted in integration, and all of a sudden they're going to drop to 1,700. It's like, okay, but maybe he hit 500 homers like Mark McGwire. No, he hit 240. Maybe he won 13 Gold Gloves like Ozzie Smith. No, he won what, 2? It's just not there. It's flat out not there. And he's a wonderful guy by all accounts. And Mets fans love him and should love him because he was a one-team player and he was so important to that franchise. And for a few years there, he was dominant. He was an excellent player. And unfortunately, he got injured. But frankly, like looking up and down at his resume, he's not a Hall of Famer. It's not there.
He's a little short for me. I get the argument. It's obviously very peak centered. I think people like to try to draw a comparison with Utley. I think Utley has more there. And all I'll just add is just to give perspective on, he got 6.2%. He would 5 fewer votes and he's off the ballot. So there's a real good chance he drops next year. And that's all I got.
This feels a little like Nomar to me.
Hmm.
When Nomar got on the ballot, he had 5.5%, something like that. The next year he dropped to 1.8. I love Nomar Garcia-Parra. One of my, I mean, I as a 45-year-old guy now, 2004, I was 25 years old. This is a heart of my baseball watching, be able to go to games, stuff like that. And Nomar is a massive part of that. But they're very similar to a lot of ways. The war stuff is similar. The hits is similar. The love of his original team. I mean, David Wright only played for Medicine. Nomar his trade famously helped launch the Red Sox to their first World Series win in 86 years. But I just kind of feel like, particularly with the fairly strong group of people coming on next year, that there's a decent possibility he falls off altogether.
And let's make it clear also, like, I'm not here to dump on David Wright, and say like it's not, there is no shame in not being a Hall of Famer. Like, it's okay not to be a Hall of Famer, and to say that a great player like David Wright or Nomar Garcia-Parra maybe just isn't a Hall of Famer.
The reality is, and like,
player.
I feel like I feel this way as well when I talked about like Torrey Hunter or whatever, that you have to draw a line somewhere. Otherwise, it's literally, it goes all the way. So yeah, there's no shame in it, and I get the idea. I could see myself maybe somehow evolving to a point where I am more inclined to someone with a career like David Wright. He was really, really great when he was really great. I really like a great third baseman when he was playing my Phillies. I couldn't hate him. He was so kind of likable and great, and I wished he was on my team as we struggled with Abraham Nunez or David Bell or whoever the heck had out there. But yeah, you have to draw the line somewhere, and David Wright's below my line.
Okay. We've got a couple other names. I don't think any of us think that they're Hall of Famers. Selfishly, I just want to like give a shout out to Jose Bautista. You never should have been a baseball Hall of Famer, and I'm fine with that. But you got in last year as in the Jays Ring of Honor or Hall of Honor. That's where you belong. Kind of David Wright vibes to me personally. And just to get here, I think is really impressive. So just shout out to Victor Martinez, Bartolo Colon, Matt Holliday, Adrian Gonzalez, Brandon Phillips, Jose Reyes, and James Shields. All of you had a
Are we sure that Bartolo Colon?
Go ahead.
Are we sure Bartolo?
I'm not shitting on Bartolo Colon. I just want to say, like,
I said, are we?
Go ahead.
I said, are we sure he's retired? He's like,
sorry. No.
One thing I have on Bartolo Colon that I unearthed was there's only one pitcher who's won more games than Colon and was one and done from the ballot. And that's Jamie Moyer. Bartolo won 247 games, whatever we think of the win stat. So not a lot of precedent for someone like that to drop off. I wouldn't vote for him, but a testament to his career. And Matt Holliday is tied with Carlos Delgado for the 7th best Hall of Fame monitor score for a position player who was one and done. So by that measure, which again is predictive and more about what people have historically valued, Matt Holliday was somebody who, in another time, I think gets 5% at least and sticks around.
Yeah, like let me just mention Matt Holliday, 2,000 hits, about 450 doubles, 300 homers. He hit 299. So we'll say basically like 2,300 homers, 300 batting average, championship batting title. That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's kind of a somewhat different caliber than a lot of the other guys who fell off.
Well, absolutely. Evan and I always say, like, we can build a legendary squad with people who fall off one and out. Not just
Ted Simmons is in the Hall of Fame, and he was one and done.
Yeah, well,
Mhm.
not just a squad. We can build like a legend. We can build a little dynasty on one and done players.
I mean, do you guys ever, speaking of him, do you guys ever actually think Lou Whitaker is going to get in as a one and done guy?
Yes.
I actually do too. Another one. I never understood that one.
I think we've gotten to the point where there's a few guys, like we talked about this, who's going to get in on the vet committees, and it's never quite clear. But it becomes evident as time goes along that there's a little echelon of players who are kind of at the top of the waiting list. And that it's in a sense only it's basically a matter of time. Maybe it'll take them 4 years, maybe it'll take them 8, 12. Eventually these guys are probably going to get in because enough people agree that they're probably worthy, and Whitaker is very much in that list.
Huge for us. Yeah. So I guess we're going to move on to our next section. I don't know if you want to join us.
Hold on. Before they leave, hold on. Before they leave, next year coming in. So next year's ballot, we're looking at Ichiro, CC Sabathia, Pedroia, Kinsler, Felix Hernandez, Tulowitzki, Zobrist, Granderson. So other than Suzuki and Sabathia, and Adam Jones in his contract, do you think there's anyone who has a chance of staying coming on? Do you think Pedroia, MVP, Rookie of the Year, injured by a slide in second base, was never quite the same? Do you think that he has a shot of at least staying?
I would say Pedroia would stay. I forget if you included Felix in the first
I
group.
did.
I mean, I think Ichiro gets in immediately. I think there's a really good chance Sabathia does too. So I think, there's very much tiers. There's Ichiro, and then there's Sabathia, who's a little bit below. And then it's kind of a bigger jump. But I think Felix is somebody that I'm very curious to see how people respond to. There's a lot of people who really like Felix. I need to really dive into his career to know really how I'd feel. I'm inclined that I'd be a yes, but he's absolutely going to get more than 5%. Beyond that, yeah, I think Pedroia gets 5%. Um, Other than that, it's kind of going to be interesting. There's a lot of people on this ballot who are going to be real tests of the dominance of war in people's mind, whether it's Kinsler, when it comes to Fangraphs war, the two catchers, Russell Martin and Brian McCann, or
Zobrist.
I was going to say Zobrist, but I couldn't even think of how you describe Zobrist with that. So it'll be interesting to see how that works, but I'm curious what Julian would say. Who do you think is going to get 5%?
I mean, I think it's the 4. I think Ichiro is going to flirt with 100%. I don't think he's going to get it because, frankly, I tweeted about this today. It's a statistical fluke. Like 100% is just not a reasonable thing to ever suspect will happen. But Ichiro is going to flirt with it. He's going to be up there in that general territory. Sabathia, I'm not sure that he'll get in on the first ballot. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he got 66% or something like that. But to me, he's just like an inevitable election within a few years. So he's more than safe. And then I think Pedroia and Felix are going to get that 5%, whether it's, 10% for Pedroia or something, 9%, and it's 15, 17 for Felix. That might be more reasonable, but I don't really think either of those are particularly in fear of falling off the ballot. Beyond that, I'd be surprised, frankly, if anyone gets that 5%. It's not impossible, but I'd frankly be personally fairly surprised if anyone does.
I want to ask Julian a question here.
Sure.
What would you put the odds at for Ian Kinsler getting 5%? And I only say that because not that I'm necessarily inclined to vote for him, but 54.1 Baseball Reference WAR. I'll have to do my research to see how often somebody of that level gets one and done. Obviously, Whitaker, it's happened. But given that and given the times we're in, what would you put the odds, Julian, at Kinsler getting 5%?
I would put them at...
And just for the audience's sake and for you two guys, Julian kind of specializes a bit in the predictive nature of this stuff.
I would put them, frankly, at something around 10%. I don't think it's impossible. I think it could happen. I think if he had one more career hit, it might jump to 20% or 25%, which is hilarious. But for those of you who don't know, Ian Kinsler retired at 1,999 hits. And if he, frankly, had one more, it might just look a lot prettier. but as stupid as that might be, it's the way it works. Fred McGriff didn't make the Hall of Fame for 20 years after retirement, and let's be real, it's because he didn't have 7 more home runs. So
it's because his best season was 94 and they stopped it in August.
Yep. So point being,
There's a
yeah, that
movie
one
about
missing hit
this.
could ding him. But yeah, I don't think it's impossible that
3000.
Kinsler makes it. I mean, I don't think it's impossible that Kinsler survives. I just think it's highly unlikely, especially because there's just a lot of other names on the ballot. Like, if he does get votes, it's gonna be as like the 10th guy.
Right. That's my thought is, regardless of anything else, that in a binary ballot or a ballot where you're not limited to 10 votes, that'd be different. I think he'd get 5% of that sort of system, but people finding a spot for him. And then if you have him, you probably have Utley and Pedroia, and like, how many second base are you going to put on there? But
it would be funny if Pedroia beat out Utley again, seeing as he beat him out in college for the position. So
I knew you were going to do that. All right, awesome. Do we have any more sort of like comments on this? Oh, all right.
I'm gonna let you guys go. This next part is
Well,
dealing with.
but before we do that, again, where can everyone follow you on the X/Twitter or whatever it is?
you can find me at Cooperstown Dave. Please give me a follow, reach out, react to whatever I say, whether you like it or not.
You can find me at _birds on the bat on Twitter, X. I don't like calling it X. Twitter at _birds on the bat.
All right, awesome. Thank you both for coming here. You are again all going to be voluntold. You're going to be back, whether you like it or not. You're here now, officially part of the Buchnerverse. And
thanks for having me.
Oh
yeah,
no, thank you for coming back. We love sort of like these deep dives on this, especially on the votes. This is a big deal for what Evan and I do here at notinhalloffame.com. And oh my God, we have so much more to do. So we are going to let you go.
All right. Take care, guys.
Thank you very much, guys.